Okay, so I'm talking to Tim Lehnen. We are lucky enough to be talking to the CTO of the Drupal Association. So thank you, Tim, for your time. It's actually Code Enigma's first video interview, so we'll see how this goes.
Fantastic.
So yeah, super happy to be able to get your attention for this afternoon. And yeah, like I say, thank you. So
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be joining you today.
awesome. So what we're doing at the minute, Code Enigma, we're a reasonably small Drupal web agency. We do more than Drupal, but that's kind of our bread and butter. So we are excited about June and Drupal 9 and all the things that that's going to bring, because it means that hopefully we can get our customers onto Drupal 9. So I wanted to talk to you. I saw that you've got 5.5 years experience, probably a little bit more, at the Drupal Association. So as someone with so much experience, I wanted to know how you got to that position. Obviously a lot of hard work, but just a bit of background about yourself would be great to start with.
Sure, yeah. My journey to my current role has been a little bit unconventional for sure, although I think that's not totally abnormal for the open source world. So when it comes to my education, for example, my degree is actually in English Lit and philosophy. So,
All right, okay.
but back in college, I was actually building Drupal websites. This was around the Drupal 4, 4.5 era. So I was building Drupal websites as a freelancer just to help pay tuition. So um, after I graduated, I moved into working for some startup organizations, all proprietary platforms. So outside of the open source world, but did some work in the healthcare industry in terms of patient management platforms and things like that. And then a number of years later, I saw that there was a position open at the Drupal Association, and it just felt like a convenient time. I was sort of looking to get into the nonprofit world, and it was just an awesome opportunity to return to my roots in the community that actually sort of literally started my career. So.
Yeah, very, very cool. So I've noticed, I've had a look at your Drupal.org profile, and you seem to commit something every month, and that's been really consistent for quite a few years now. So you must have worked on something that's stuck in your mind more than others. So what's like the coolest thing that you've enjoyed working on?
Oh my gosh, it's a good question, and it's funny because in many ways I actually don't write all that much code anymore day to day in my work. Because truth to be told, I wasn't ever much more than a fairly mediocre developer, but I have kind of a knack. I have kind of a knack for the project management side, and that's where a lot of these Drupal contributions come in today. Is I'm often working with different initiative teams to help write a spec or review implementation plans or recruit contributors, all those sorts of things. So the big project over the course of last year was the Drupal Association worked with the European Commission on the first phase of automatic updates for Drupal. So that was a really cool initiative. And we're hoping that work can find some additional sponsorship and keep moving this year as well.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, that is pretty cool. So with the amount that you've given, granted, okay, you say you're not doing too much hands-on with the code anymore, you must have had to be innovative the whole time, regardless of what angle you're applying your processes to. So how have you been so consistent and so innovative throughout these years? Because it is a lot. You should give yourself some credit. It is a lot of work that you've done.
Yeah, no, it certainly is, and it's something I'm actually fairly proud of. I mean, stepping back for just a second, I love being able to contribute in this way, right? Making a contribution to a larger community is really fulfilling, which is part of the reason that's kept me motivated, right? In Drupal, we've said for a long time that code isn't the only thing you can contribute, and I still do some of that, but it's a great feeling to live the truth that you can contribute in all these other sorts of ways to this project. And it's not something that we just pay lip service to, right? Contributions to Drupal, I think people, whether I was looking for it or not, have started giving me credit for some big initiatives and things like that. And
Yeah.
again, most of my contribution to those things is just in the PM side. So it just makes me proud that our community works that way. Now, when it comes to the innovation side, that's a tough question, to be honest. It's really hard to know what it means to be innovative.
Yeah.
And I am kind of fundamentally suspicious of the word innovation, just because I grew up in the Bay Area in California, Silicon Valley, and in recent years, the Silicon Valley trend for innovation was disruption, to be disruptive, and finding an industry that's stagnated in its approach to some core problem, change that paradigm. And yeah, that kind of innovation can be powerful, but it can also be destructive, right? It's like you talk about the gig economy and ride sharing, right? And that's in some ways been very interesting, but also has kind of removed some protections for the drivers and all these sorts of things. So I try to be careful and suspicious of what the industry as a whole considers innovation.
Yeah.
For me, innovation means just never being complacent. So it's important to, especially because I think a lot of people who don't have formal education in this have some amount of imposter syndrome. It's sort of important to acknowledge that you've built expertise and you've built experience.
Yeah.
But it's also critical that you stay open to like new experience and new approaches. So I think for me, that's a really big part of trying to stay innovative. And then more specifically in open source, especially, a really powerful way to do that is simply to just follow other projects as well, right? I try not to stay stuck just looking at what Drupal's doing, but seeing what the leadership of other communities are focusing on really sparks some new ideas.
That's cool. That leads me really nicely actually into the next question. So if you could pick one thing, what's the main change that you would like to see within Drupal or even within the community over the next few versions? Bearing in mind that I really appreciate what you've just said there about your kind of own personal definition of disruption and innovation. So maybe you don't want to see a change, but what sort of evolution it might like?
I definitely do. I mean, I think there's really some strong opportunities, right? So Drupal has a well-deserved reputation for being, an engineer's framework, right? Whether you're calling it a CMS or a digital experience platform or a PHP framework, like however you describe it, the core technology is really powerful and really innovative in terms of features. Like we have people doing all sorts of cutting-edge creative things these days in terms of multi-channel support with like voice and personalization and AI and the fact that you can run Drupal from the seat of a Lufthansa plane, right, is not something anybody would have expected 10 years ago. So that's cool, but honestly, I think the biggest opportunity for Drupal is user experience. So I think empowering end users of Drupal to actually access all of that power and all of that functionality with less friction would make a really big impact.
Yeah.
We've spent the last couple major versions of Drupal building all of these features and functionality. And the community, I think, to its credit, is pivoting towards, okay, great, we've built these awesome things. Now can we build a tooling layer that makes them accessible? So that's great.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what I think would be the next generation. So that's not particularly feature focused right now, but I do think it's really important for the project. And there are a few little feature things that I think could actually be really powerful. Like I mentioned earlier, that automatic updates initiative that we were working on a little bit last year, that could be critical. That'll improve security for everybody. It would reduce cost of ownership for end users. There's an initiative to start gathering telemetry from Drupal sites out in the wild to give us real world data about how Drupal's used, and that could inform future development. I think that could be really cool. So actually the last one that I think would be really cool is kind of a small feature, but Drupal currently doesn't have a way for us to just make announcements or push messaging to the Drupal admin UI itself. And that ability to have a project messaging channel could really multiply our community reach and maybe help us grow the contributor base. So
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't have to be a huge change for it to be an effective one. So that would be pretty cool to be able to do.
Yeah.
Um, you touched just then on security and
Mhm.
being cost effective. So again, nicely leads into my next question. What do you think the biggest fear is for organizations or companies about adopting an open source platform?
Yeah, so this is a good question, and I have split feelings because I am a bleeding heart about open source software. And so truthfully, it's hard for me to imagine any organization having a hang up about open source in 2020. It's not
Yeah,
like it's the new kid on the block anymore. Drupal itself is nearly 20 years old, and
yeah,
there's a whole generation of software developers who are like younger than Linux. So it's really hard to think that it's even a question that still needs to come up. But yes, there are people who are still concerned about the notion of security when all the code is out there for anyone to see, who don't realize that having that broad access just means that these security issues are identified faster, that there's more input, that there's
Mhm.
more rapid iteration and attention to these things.
Yeah,
um, Similar with cost of ownership, I think that might actually be almost one of the biggest hangups. And it's not exactly the cost of ownership side, but I think it's that a lot of, especially sort of larger, more old-fashioned kind of corporate end users don't necessarily comprehend that open source doesn't have like this single vendor you go to
Mhm.
purchase your license and to handle everything for you.
Yeah, yeah,
And we, of course, see that as a positive, but with a proprietary platform, you know where to go to
yeah.
kind of get some work done. And with open source, you have a broad range of choices. There's a really robust ecosystem.
Mhm.
And so I think um, to meet that challenge, one thing we're trying to do here in Drupal is kind of surface those organizations who are good partners to end users.
Yeah.
And that's partly what the kind of contribution credit system on Drupal.org is about, because we believe fundamentally that the best contributors to Drupal will have the most expertise to lend to client projects. So we kind of have to train the end users to understand what the signals are within open source for finding that good work.
Cool. Yeah, I like it. So back to your work then. We know that that your team in particular, you've made some huge changes to the services that the Drupal Association is able to provide through Drupal.org, and that's supporting the upgrade from version 8, whatever 8 you're on, maybe even 7, and then to 9, and then beyond that as well. So I wanted to talk about the awesome work that you've been doing, because even Rachel mentioned this about be why it's worthwhile talking to you about how you're making that upgrade process just so much easier for developers than it might have been otherwise. Maybe a little bit more painful. So yeah, let's talk about what you've been doing.
Oh yeah. So there's quite a lot we could talk about here, and I'll do my best to keep it fairly brief because there's so many tools. And to be clear, like everything that the Drupal Association does, it's dependent on a collaboration with all of the volunteers and core contributors who are also working on this. And
Yeah.
it's been important, I think, to the Drupal community as a whole to make this upgrade cycle as easy as we can. So from the DA point of view, sort of the fundamental service that the Drupal Association engineering team provides, our mission within the larger organization, is to create the tools the community uses to build Drupal. And so along those lines, there have been some focus areas and resources as part of this release cycle that are really important. So
Mhm.
Drupal CI is the automated testing infrastructure that we maintain for the Drupal project. And so that's the tool that every contributed module maintainer, everyone who makes a plugin for Drupal is using to verify that their code works
Yeah.
with various versions of Drupal core. But we've added some additional kind of side branch features to that in collaboration with the community to specifically support Drupal 9. So there's a weekly job that runs on the Drupal CI stack that uses the PHP stand software to
Mhm.
check the entire contributed module ecosystem for any compatibility issues with Drupal 9.
Yeah.
And so that lets anybody in the contrib ecosystem see what's going to be ready, what's not ready yet, what might need to be worked on. And then very recently, we've also integrated Drupal Rector patches. So Drupal Rector are automatically generated patches for like the most common upgrade needs. So if there's a deprecation of a common function and all it is switch from this function to that function, you can create an automated patch for that. So we're now actually running that as well for every contributed project in the Drupal ecosystem and creating these automated patches that will help contributed module maintainers just upgrade to Drupal 9 compatibility just by applying these patches. So those can be really, really cool. And then finally, those tools are also available to people who have custom code on their specific Drupal sites, right? So there's the Drupal upgrade status module. There is the PHP stand command line tool. There's the Drupal Rector tools. So any organization out there who has custom code for their clients, or any end user organization who's written custom code, can also use those things to help them get ready for Drupal 9.
Cool. So considering you're making it as easy as possible, what do you think are the biggest benefits of upgrading to Drupal 9?
That's a really great question. And actually, I'm going to kind of turn that question on its head just a little bit, because the best reason to upgrade to Drupal 9, I think, is because as of version 9, Drupal is realizing its potential of becoming evergreen software. So it's difficult for us to break out of this way of thinking, because before Drupal 8, all prior versions of Drupal were basically replatforming, right? You had to basically migrate rather than update to get to the new version. The vision going back to Drupal 8 itself was to start creating a continuous and easy upgrade path, not just for the minor versions, which introduce all these wonderful new features, but also for major versions like 9. And I think there was a healthy skepticism about whether or not that would actually come to fruition. But now that we're close to the release, I think we're proving that that's a reality. So in my mind, the best reason to upgrade is because upgrading means you stay on the train of continuous innovation and new features that the community is producing. You get the benefit of everything that's happened over the course of the Drupal 8 release cycle, and you'll get everything that'll happen over the course of 9 and into 10 even, as it continues to be this upgrade path. So for the first time in Drupal's history, the next major version is coming out exactly on time, with thousands of modules already compatible with the new version. Like, that's a really big deal, and it's really exciting.
Absolutely. So are there any reasons not to upgrade, in your opinion?
You know, in the long term, no, there's no reason not to. In the short to medium term, you might have some reservations. So maybe you have a large amounts of custom code. So as I said before, you're not entirely able to rely on the fact that the community has done all this work to make things compatible already. Or maybe you're using some of those more obscure modules that aren't D9 ready yet. Or maybe you're coming from Drupal 7 or a non-Drupal platform entirely, and so just that, so you are still in a re-platform type situation, and that can seem intimidating. I think in those cases, the upgrade is absolutely still worthwhile, but take your time. Maybe look for a Drupal ecosystem partner. It could be someone like Enigma who could help you make that leap, make that transition. But now's really the time to begin planning and thinking about that, because especially if you're one of those folks who's still on 7 or on a non-Drupal platform, like I said, the advantage of making that initial leap is that you then get on that continuous innovation train. So
I didn't even need to pay you to say that. So obviously we definitely agree, and we want to make that transition as easy as possible, whether it be the big leap or maybe just a smaller one. But from our opinion, the benefits are too big to not warrant spending the time on actually doing it. So it's cool to hear from someone who's been hands-on to say that. So We've managed to get, however far in we are to this interview without mentioning the current situation. It is unavoidable, and I do want to bring it up because I wanted to ask you about the Drupal Cares Match Challenge I saw on Drupal.org that you're involved with. So just wanted to know a little bit more about that and how people, or how we can help.
Yeah, so thanks, Megan. Let me first acknowledge that obviously the COVID-19 pandemic is a frightening time for a lot of people around the world, right? I've been fortunate. My family hasn't yet been personally affected, but I had friends in Seattle, Washington, who got it and who were in quarantine for many weeks. And I know there are many other people in the Drupal community and the wider world who are hurting right now. But there's positivity to be found in the way communities rise to a challenging situation. And so in Drupal, some of your listeners may not realize this, but Drupal's actually being used by a number of end user organizations who are on the front lines of the pandemic. So here in the States, the Centers for Disease Control, the National Institutes of Health are both Drupal users. And also Doctors Without Borders and Oxfam and many other organizations, both in the United States and internationally, are focused on this effort. But unfortunately, these social distancing and isolation measures, which are critically important for our health and safety, are also having a kind of devastating impact on organizations like us that depend on events for fundraising. So we've had to cancel DrupalCon Minneapolis. That was planned for May, and it just won't be safe to hold an event. And DrupalCon is the fundraiser that provides 60% of our operating revenue each year. So we're looking at a significant shortfall. So the Drupal Cares campaign is a fundraiser to raise $500,000 to close that budget shortfall and ensure that the Drupal Association can continue to meet our mission to support the project and the ecosystem. And that fundraiser runs through the end of May. But what's kind of incredible is I just double checked the status of the donations before jumping on this call. And it looks like we'll actually meet that initial goal of $500,000 as early as the end of the day today.
Oh,
so
excellent.
That would be a month ahead of schedule as we're recording. Yeah, so which means, and of course, we're going to keep the campaign open because there's still a lot of uncertainty. We think this is what we need, but anything that we can put into the war chest, so to speak, to get us through this tough time is ultimately something we can reinvest in the community. So we're incredibly close, thanks to the generosity of a lot of individuals and organizations in the community. And in addition to that, you know, Dries, the project founder of Drupal, and his wife, Vanessa, are offering a $100,000 matching donation. And on top of that, a number of organizations in the Drupal business ecosystem came together to match it by another $100,000 again. So that made a huge difference in us being able to accelerate this campaign so quickly. So I'm super humbled and thankful for the support. And one final note on that, despite the fact that we've had to cancel DrupalCon in North America this year, we're still looking forward to trying to gather the community together. So we're trying to turn this into an opportunity. We've just announced what we're calling DrupalCon Global, because if we're going to have a virtual event, it's an opportunity for us to bring people all over the world together in a virtual way. So that's planned for mid-July, July 14th to 17th. And so you can support the association by getting tickets for that event and joining us with the community. There's a chance actually that it could turn into our biggest con ever, since there's no geographic barrier to how we bring folks together. And then in December, we're hoping, if things go well, to still have DrupalCon Europe in Barcelona. So hopefully we'll still manage to do all of those things.
Absolutely. Well, I know that we'll sign up for the online version, and Code Enigma's been going to DrupalCons just forever. So I was sad that I wouldn't get a ticket to America, I have to admit, because I enjoy them very much. So yeah, absolutely. Barcelona sounds like a good shout. So it's such a testament to the community spirit of Drupal that you've managed to hit your target, and I'm super happy I got to talk to you today when you're close to hitting the target, if not going over it. That's cool timing for me.
Yeah, it's really great.
That's awesome, and it just shows how cool the community is when you get together. So brilliant. And the last thing, I did skip over it because I wanted to save it to last because I've noticed the background there. And you might have more time, you might not have any more time, but you must be consuming a bit more content. So I wanted to ask if there's any blogs or podcasts or books that you're reading at the minute that you recommend to anybody, because other people certainly have a bit more time on their hands.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. You know, strangely enough, I probably have less time on my hands just because we're doing this fundraising campaign and all these other things. But yeah, there are definitely some things that I read. As far as blogs go, some of it is a little bit, some of them are kind of boring basics. Like I'm a regular reader of Lifehacker and the Suite Setup, which just to nerd out about productivity tools. But I do also try and follow some blogs and listservs and newsletters, whatever channel is available for some of those community projects, especially outside of Drupal, that I'm interested in. So right now, I would throw a shout to the CHAOS project. It stands for Community Health Analytics for Open Source Software. So this is a project underneath the Linux Foundation that's doing some really interesting work similar to the Drupal project's contribution recognition work to come up for some standards for measuring open source community health. And that's an area that I just totally geek out about. So I'm really, really following that closely. And then as far as books go, with everything going on in the world, I've been spending most of my time with fiction.
Yeah.
But as far as
advisable.
Yeah, right. A little bit of escapism is really key, especially when I can't even escape my house. But but as far as the nonfiction side goes, I'm trying to do a little bit. So on nonfiction, I'm finally getting around to reading Hidden Figures by Margot Lee Shetterly. And I'm also thinking about picking up a book called The Future is Faster Than You Think. It looks really interesting and kind of touches a little bit on our conversation earlier about what the modern definition of innovation is. But then on the fiction side, which is my comfort food, I have recently been rereading a ton of the Terry Pratchett Discworld books, which are just delightful and snarky and so empathetic. You know, that the human understanding is so clear in those books, and it's just a joy to go back to them and read them again. And then I've recently discovered an author, Maggie Stiefvater, and really enjoyed her Raven Boys series. So for the fiction readers out there, give those a look.
Sweet. Well, that sounds really good. Well, thank you very, very much for spending some time with us and doing our first interview. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Megan.